All right, today we are going to dive deep into one of the most just unbelievable and devastating financial frauds in history. I mean, this is a story all about trust, massive deception, and what happens when an entire system just fails. Let's get into it and try to unravel Madoff's $65 billion lie.
Yeah, just take a second and look at that number. $65 billion. That's the estimated size of the hole Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme tore through the lives of thousands of investors. It's a number so big it's hard to even wrap your head around, right? It almost feels fake. But the damage, that was incredibly personal and very, very real. So the huge question we have to ask is, how in the world could a lie this massive go on for so long?
Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the man himself and the legend he built around him. Then, we'll pull back the curtain on the surprisingly simple trick behind his so-called magic. After that, we'll dig into why everyone, and I mean everyone, failed to stop him. We'll watch the whole thing come crashing down, and then finally, we'll ask the big one. Have we actually learned anything from this?
So let's start with Section 1, the Wall Street legend. Because really, the foundation of this entire fraud, it wasn't some complex algorithm. It was Bernie Madoff himself. See, he wasn't some sketchy outsider. Far from it. He was a pillar of Wall Street. He spent decades building this image of incredible success and, even more important, absolute trustworthiness. And here's what he was selling. Madoff's firm offered something that was, well, basically unbelievable. You had these improbably stable returns year after year, no matter what the market was doing. Think about that. While everyone else was on a roller coaster of ups and downs, his fund just smoothly went up. He was offering a total fantasy, all the profits of the stock market with zero risk. Now, for any investor who knows what they're doing, that should have been a massive red flag, right?
But that red flag was completely ignored, and this quote tells you exactly why. Madoff turned exclusivity into a weapon. See, getting your money into his fund, it wasn't just about investing. It was a status symbol. It meant you were in. He created this whole culture where if you started asking tough questions, you weren't being smart, you were being rude. It was seen as an insult. The message was clear. You're lucky to be here, so don't rock the boat.
All right, so that brings us to our next section, the impossible formula. What was really behind that curtain of exclusivity? Was it some secret, genius trading strategy? Nope, it was just a classic, old-fashioned scam.
And at the heart of it is the Ponzi scheme. It's so important to understand what this actually is. The best way to think about it, it's like a game of financial musical chairs. As long as new people keep bringing in money, the chairs, the music keeps playing and everyone's happy. But the second that new money dries up, the music stops. And anyone left without a chair, they lose everything.
And here's exactly how Madoff pulled it off step by step. Step 1, we've already talked about. Build that myth of trust and exclusivity. Step 2, that's the engine of the whole thing. You pay the old investors their profits using the cash from new investors. You're just moving money around. And then steps 3 and 4 are how you cover your tracks. He faked everything, all the trading records, the account statements, completely fabricated. And he absolutely blocked anyone from getting an independent look at his books, hiding behind this idea of a proprietary secret.
Which, leads us to maybe the most uncomfortable part of this whole story. Section 3, a cascade of failures. Where were the watchdogs? Because a fraud this big that lasts for decades, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It needs a total breakdown of all the systems that are supposed to protect us.
And this is the question that really just haunts the Madoff case. I mean, with so much money on the line, why did all these sophisticated people and institutions, why did they fail to see the truth? We're not talking about your average everyday investor here. We're talking about huge hedge funds, global banks, and people who are supposed to be incredibly financially savvy. How did all of them get it so completely wrong?
Well, a big part of the answer is just basic human psychology. People totally shut off their normal skepticism, all because of Madoff's reputation. They saw their friends, their colleagues, their rivals investing, and thought, hey, if it's good enough for them, it must be good enough for me. That's social proof, and it's incredibly powerful. The fear of missing out, FOMO, on those amazing returns was way stronger than the fear of losing money. And Madoff was a genius at this. He framed all his secrecy not as a red flag, but as the velvet rope to an exclusive club.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just the investors who dropped the ball. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, the main regulator, they got multiple credible warnings about Madoff for years, and they just did nothing.
They'd send in examiners, sure, but they were often pretty green, and Madoff could easily run circles around them with his fake documents and his big reputation. I mean, come on, this guy was the former chairman of the NASDAQ. He was part of the club.
But here's the fundamental truth. No Ponzi scheme can go on forever. The math just doesn't work. Eventually, you run out of new money, and that house of cards has to come tumbling down. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
And just look at this timeline. It's staggering. We think the scheme started in the early 90s. The first real warning got to regulators in 2000 and was ignored. So what finally blew it up? The 2008 global financial crisis. All of a sudden, that fire hose of new money just shut off. And at the same time, nervous investors started asking for their money back. The music stopped. There was no new cash to pay them with. The whole thing just imploded, practically overnight.
So, after all the dust settled, the big question on everyone's mind was, what do we do to make sure this never, ever happens again? Are there lessons we can actually learn from this?
And to be fair, there were some real concrete changes. Regulators definitely tightened the rules for investment advisors. You know, how they're watched, how they handle client money. The whole point was to make it way harder for someone to just lie about the assets they have. But that leads to an even bigger question, doesn't it? Can you really legislate against human nature?
Because when you look at today's world, the tools might look different, but the patterns, they look awfully familiar. With Madoff, the source of trust was his personal reputation. Today, it might be hype from some social media influencer about the next big crypto coin. With Madoff, you couldn't verify the assets because he was so secretive. Today, it can be hard to verify assets because the technology is so complex for the average person. And the regulators, well, they're still trying to play catch-up. It all feels a little familiar, doesn't it?
And all of this leaves us with one last really crucial question to think about. It's easy and right to blame Bernie Madoff. He's the criminal. But what about everyone else? What about the regulators who missed warning after warning? What about the so-called gatekeepers, the feeder funds that funneled billions to him? And what about the investors themselves, who willingly suspended their disbelief because they wanted those impossible returns? The real legacy of this $65 billion lie isn't just about one man's epic crime. It's about a whole web of failure, and it forces us to ask a really tough question. Where does the responsibility truly begin, and where does it end?